Now, talking of extremism, an extremist group wants to sue the Vatican for crimes against humanity and take the Pope to a trial in The Hague. The media screams incessantly that every priest is a paedophile and anti-Catholicism is the last acceptable prejudice. Well, Bill Donahue is president of the Catholic League, and he joins me from New York City. How are you, sir?
Very good, Michael. Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Now, this rubbish about the Pope, a war criminal, and taking the Vatican to The Hague, where they take mass murderers and genocidal killers, it is just a publicity stunt, isn't it?
Well, it basically is. I mean, although the goal of them is to get the Pope, and I say them, I mean the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, known as SNAP, working with the lawyer who greases them very well, who's made tens of millions of dollars, Jeffrey Anderson. They know they're not going to win in the courts, but there is the court of public opinion. And they would have us believe that there's an ongoing scandal. Quite frankly, there was a scandal in the Catholic Church, and shame on the Catholic Church for allowing it to go on. But it ended about a quarter of a century ago. The number of cases of the abuse of minors today is a trickle, thank God. There shouldn't even be one. But what they're doing is they're drumming up old cases, making it sound like the Pope, the omnipotent, omnipresent, ubiquitous Pope. He knows everything. He runs everything from Rome. And every priest all over the world, from Boston to Bombay, just clicks his heels at the sound of the Pope. It's all insanity.
Now, we should make this quite clear. I mean, all of us, and those who are, and I include myself in this proudly, faithful, serious Catholics, any priest who was abused, and by the way, we both know most of them, it wasn't actually paedophilia, it was homosexual abuse.
Absolutely.
What they did was repugnant, grotesque, and the victims, the direct victims, and people like us, I've got 4 kids, for goodness sake, I'm a Catholic father, it's been stopped, thank God, these people are horrendous, end of story. But this notion that it's everywhere, now we know for example, far more chance of a tragedy happening within public education, in organised sport. But these organisations, you mentioned SNAP, was it? They do seem to be exploiting the situation.
Well, you know, I'm not opposed to going back 50 years and looking for dirt in the Catholic Church, provided that we look for dirt amongst the Jews and the Protestants and the Muslims, the school teachers and the swimming coaches and everybody else. Yep. But when you cherry pick my religion, and that's exactly what's going on, you're going to get my ire up. And this is what's the tragedy. They know that there's not enough new cases out there to get any new blood. So they're going back over decades looking for some old cases, trying to drag the church into the mud. And this is an agenda. And I had some people at a SNAP conference in July, and so I know exactly the way they're thinking from the inside.
Yeah. This current Pope as well, I mean, he's had to put up with a great deal of, well, frankly, it's racism. I mean, coming from Britain originally, when he visited the UK, it was extraordinary because initially he's Catholic and he's German. I mean, this is just a red rag to a bull in Britain. But he left with them loving him. But there's a lot of anti-German feeling, lies told about him. If anything, I would argue he was more understanding and stricter about this even than the last Pope, John Paul.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. Remember what he said when he became Pope, when they installed him? He said we have to get rid of the filth. That was just before he came in. We've got to get rid of the filth in the Catholic Church. He's the one who went after the legionaries of Christ. He's the one who's policing this thing. Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned about the other secular institutions alike. Carol Shakeshaft is a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in the United States, and she's the nation's leading expert on the sexual abuse of minors by public school teachers. She's estimated the rate is over 100 times as great. Now, where is SNAP? Where are all these other people exercised about what the public schools are doing? And, in fact, they have all kinds of immunity in state laws in the United States as well. Look, Der Spiegel did a very fine job last week in Germany talking about how well the Pope was received. It was the New York Times in my hometown in New York City that did a lousy job making it sound like as if the Pope was greeted by nothing but hostile people over there. The German people, for the most part, were cordial, and Der Spiegel did a better job than the New York Times.
Yeah. Now, Sinead O'Connor, who, of course, is the Oxford professor of philosophy and morals, and shaves her head, she's come out with some very enlightened comments about the Pope, hasn't she?
Yes, she wants him shot. She says, I can't use the word an expletive on TV, but that's what we have to do with this man. We have to have a bloodbath. Now, the only reason I'm not going totally ballistic on this, I am bringing it to the attention of people, is because a couple of weeks ago she tweeted that she was like basically on suicide watch and the cops had to get over there. So, I mean, listen, the girl has a lot of problems and she needs to be attended to. In the meantime, whatever family and friends she has, they ought to tell her to ramp down the rhetoric, because this is dangerous. There are a lot of lunatics around the world who might take this lady seriously.
Yeah. Look, I'm sorry that she may have been suicidal. Mind you, if it was tweeted, you wonder if it was genuine or not. But, OK, we take that into consideration. But Mel Gibson was drunk when he made those bloody stupid comments about Jews, and he quickly apologized. She isn't drunk, and she has called for someone to be murdered.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that is an important question. And quite frankly, one of the things that we discussed at the Catholic League this morning was if she had attacked gays and said they should be shot, wouldn't the gay community be registering a complaint? Of course they would. They may say, albeit that she does have some problems. Look, I've debated this woman on Larry King. I mentioned about the sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. I talked about very few of them were prepubescent, and she literally, I'm not making this up, Michael, she says, prepubescent? Prepubescent, what is that? I'd never heard. What is puberty? What kind of words are these? That's what you're dealing with. Stay
with us. There is so much more I want to hear from you. I wish there were 1,000 more like you. Stay with us, my friend. Welcome back to Bill Donahue, the Catholic League, and really, I wish there were so many more like this man. And the reason we have one of those Americans on, we're a Canadian station, is we have some wonderful people in Canada, but Canadians tend to be more polite, and even though Catholics are really being punched and kicked, metaphorically and literally, frankly, all over this country, it's quite difficult to find Catholics who can go on TV and really state their case, not being rude or irresponsible, but just telling people what is really going on out there. Bill, let's talk about San Francisco. I'm one of those people who I'm not allowed to go naked by law. It will be too offensive to too many people. But they're taking their clothes off or something in San Francisco?
Yes, California is a strange place to begin with. It's the land of fruits and nuts. And in California, it's okay to go totally nude. Now, nobody ever exercises that, quote, Madisonian right, except for the people, and that is to say homosexuals, of course, in San Francisco. Now, they do it every year at the Folsom Street Fair. They also get whipped, and they also get dressed up as Jesus and as nuns. Just yesterday, on Sunday in San Francisco, they had men stretched out on a cross, on a metal cross, getting whipped. They're all naked in the streets, and they just think it's cute there. But now they've taken it to a new level. There are men who are walking into McDonald's and Burger King and local restaurants totally naked, and they think they have a right to do so, and evidently the law says they can. Now there's a prospective law. One of the guys there, by the name of Wiener, says that he wants to have I'm not making this up, he wants to have not like Anthony, who had to get thrown out of New York City, but this guy wants to have a law which says, number one, you can't go naked into the restaurants, and number two, when you sit on a public bench, you have to have a towel or, like a handkerchief, or I think they sell wipes in the supermarket. You have to put something below your bottom. So they consider this to be another act of oppression, of course, to homosexuals, and they're complaining that this law is totally unnecessary and targeting a certain group of people. When I was a kid, if somebody told me what I just said to the people in Canada, you probably would call 911 and have them locked up in the asylum. But actually, the asylum is live, and it's in San Francisco. My God, I tell you, you touch my Big Mac, and it's a punch in the face. Listen, how did this happen? Putting aside Catholicism, most North Americans, the vast majority, it's coexistence, get along. I may not agree with you, you may surprise me, you may shock me, but we just exist together. When did this happen that certain groups thought they could exploit Constitution, Bill of Rights, laws, charter in this country, and just act like idiots? Well, I think it began in the 1960s when liberty took a full-blown understanding and it became unhinged and untethered from any kind of moral grounding. So what you wind up with not liberty, you wind up with libertinism, which is really a form of license to do whatever you want to do. Even John Stuart Mill in 1859 argued on liberty that there has to be some degree of responsibilities on the part of people. But we live in a world today, I think in the West in general, some places could be worse than others, where the idea of responsibilities as hinged to rights is regarded as oppressive. The Pope, I think, spoke very eloquently, as he normally does, on the subject of freedom when he was in Germany. And this is good for everybody. It's not just good for Catholics. Freedom has to be understood as the right to do what we ought to do, not the right whatever we want to do. Yeah. That kind of libertinism always leads to moral depravity, and it paves the way for some serious problems, as we've seen in Germany about 100 years ago.
Yeah. Well, in Britain, if we're talking about this, I think, on Wednesday, but in Britain, a Christian guy, not a Catholic, I don't think, he has a cafeteria, a little corner cafe, and he plays DVDs of the New Testament DVDs on the TV. Frankly, I think it'd be fairly boring. However, that's what he does. You don't want to go in there, don't go in there. A gay guy has complained the police are now threatening him with arrest unless he stops playing these DVDs of the New Testament while people are being served their food. I find this extraordinary. From Britain, which is meant to be the country of freedom.
Well, I mean, and of course, in the United States, I mean, we love Britain for all it's done and what was bequeathed to us. But look, here's what we have. The most dreaded words in the English language today are thou shalt not.
Yeah.
We have a society of brats throughout Western civilization who don't want to be told anything. They don't want to answer to any authority. And of course, especially that means him. Oh, yes, people, there is a God. And at some day, at some time, in some place, people are going to have to pay the piper at the end of the day. But no, we live in a society where everybody wants to make up his own rules, his own regulations. The kind of incivility that I see in my hometown, New York, is really absurd compared to anything I've seen when I was growing up as a kid. And it happens, again, when freedom just becomes an individualistic understanding and interpretation, where there are no moral truths, where there are no absolutes. If that's the case, people, remember who said there's no such thing as truth. His name was Adolf Hitler. And what he meant by that is, what's true for you may not be true for me, so how dare you criticize him? You know, in the United States, we put pizza into ovens, and in Germany, they put Jews into ovens. Is that a matter of different strokes for different folks? I hope people wake up.
Oh, golly, well said. Just that point you mentioned, but when you were growing up, how much civility there was compared to today. We're not that different in age. You might be a little older than me, but when I grew up in London, you grew up in the States, far less money around. I mean, there was some genuine poverty. People didn't have much. My dad never owned a new car, for goodness sake. He worked 6.5 days a week. But there was a civility that we have, to a certain extent, not completely, but to a certain extent, have completely lost now, particularly in urban centres.
Well, that's what happens when you have radical individualism. For example, no society can exist without a moral consensus. It doesn't have to be unanimity. A consensus means general agreement. But there has to be an understanding of what the norms are. Otherwise, you get into what Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the late sociologist, said. We wind up defining deviancy down. Ultimately, that's not good, particularly for the least among us, because now the strong can persecute the weak, and no one's in a position to say, well, what you're doing violates the normative order. There's got to be a normative order. We can argue about how tight and how loose the parameters must be, but to say that there shouldn't be any, that every individual willy-nilly makes up his own ideas of right and wrong, well, let me tell you something. Jeffrey Dahmer had a conscience. He followed his conscience. He killed his victims, and then he ate them for supper.
We'd like to have you back every couple of weeks. Would you do that?
Sure.
Yeah.
For you, Michael, the wonderful people in Canada, why not?
You're a good man. Thank you so very much indeed.
Thank you.